My presentation here, my brief, is to talk a little bit about not just to build on the great strategies that Adam shared about contextualizing current events and finding resources to help students understand them, but also some of the ways that we can approach talking about these issues, and in particular migration as a current event, knowing, as one of you pointed out, that it's an issue that can be quite polarizing, and it can bring out a lot of emotions and concerns about conflict in the classroom. So at Facing History, we're a nonprofit about over 40 years old now, really dedicated to helping teachers and work with students so they become more equitable, more engaged, and more responsible citizens who can create more just and inclusive worlds. And I think that's probably a mission that many of you share. We have taught about history for a long time, and if you know of us, you might know of our case studies on race and membership in the United States, or about the rise of the Nazis and the Holocaust. And many of the histories we teach really have migration threaded through as a theme. In the last couple of years, we've really redoubled our efforts to help educators talk about current events for a couple of reasons. One of them is that it's been clear for a really long time that talking about current events is the best way to nurture young people as civic actors. It's a proven practice in civic education that is supported by data. And with the kinds of events that we've been seeing over the last couple of years, increasing division, polarization, violence, concerns about the decline of democracy, being able to talk about these issues in school is perhaps more important than ever. But we also hear from teachers it is more challenging than ever because of all of those concerns I named earlier. Teachers, including maybe some of you who are on this webinar today, might feel like, well, how can I handle the range of opinions that might be in my classroom? Will it be perceived as political if I talk about current events? So we created a new program within Facing History with a website and regular new materials to help educators address these topics. And I think too, for those of you who don't work with a middle school or high school population, a lot of these materials and strategies are ones that I even have used to guide conversations with adults. We all need this kind of civic education, I think. And for adults who are English language learners, these conversations are ones that can really build vocabulary and help folks practice around issues that are relevant. And we know that when learners are talking about issues that are relevant to them, the learning goes deeper. So the first few things I'd like to share are actually drawn from this current events toolkit and a checklist, which is something that educators or facilitators can use really to sort of reflect and get their own goals in order before going into the classroom. So here are some recommendations we have. This is really something you could use if you were preparing to talk about any current event. We really encourage educators to think about, what are my goals in bringing this issue into the classroom? Is it to inform my students? Is it to have a conversation across difference? Is it to ignite a sense of agency? Depending on what you want to do, depending on your goals, that will influence how you approach a particular topic. You'll think about, how do I choose which issues I want to address? And if those issues are difficult, which, migration can be a difficult issue in the classroom, we really want to think about, well, what makes this issue challenging to bring to my students? Is it difficult because it's something that is making young people feel vulnerable or scared? Is it a story about ICE raids, for example, if you're teaching in a school that has a large immigrant population? Or is it difficult because it is politically divisive? Is it difficult because you're going to get a wide range of very emotional opinions? When you think about the kind of conversation that you want to have in the classroom, you really want to think about, what are the strategies available to help my students have a reflective and respectful discussion? This is a grab from the Current Events Toolkit, which you can find on our website. And there's a lot of different teaching strategies, including, I think, maybe one that Adam mentioned that we also use, that can help you both to delve beneath the surface of event using something like an iceberg strategy, conversational protocols for discussing contentious topics, reflective activities for processing an event that may be emotionally difficult. There's some great strategies for analyzing images that you could use with those political cartoons that we just saw, and there's many others. But we think that this is a really important practice to understand not just what are the issues I want to talk about and what sources will I use, but also what are the strategies that I sort of have in my educator's toolbox to guide and shape this conversation. let's see, I have one more thing I wanted to say about this, which is, another important part of preparing to talk about current events is really establishing the right kind of climate or set of norms in your classroom. We, in our seminars that we do with educators about immigration, always have this framing that reasonable people might disagree about a particular policy, and there's room for different opinions, but we're going to have this conversation in a way which respects the humanity and the dignity of everybody involved in the story, both those who were in the room and those who were not in the room. We always agree that we're not going to use dehumanizing language or stereotypes, and we really try to keep each other to that contract. Setting those ground rules before the discussion can really help you to be successful. So on this current events page, we have not only that toolkit with a lot of links, including to things like media literacy strategies, but we also have a series of themes that we explore over the course of the year, and we publish new material about every other week and sometimes more often. So one of those themes is global migration, and then you see we also address democracy and civic engagement, hate, violence, and injustice, and media literacy. So I want to share with you a few resources about migration specifically that I think might be helpful in your context. So this year we started creating not just sort of short lesson plans, but also what you see here, something called an explainer, which is a short resource. You can print it out as a PDF and copy it easily. And it's something that gives students or other learners a sort of shared vocabulary, some shared information and data that will help you to both understand stories that you're reading in the news and then also have better and more informed conversations about them. So this is an explainer we created about migration that, as you can sort of see here, gives a sense of the numbers that at least were current in September, I think, when we published this, and goes on to define who is a migrant, who is a refugee, what are some of the international laws and statutes that govern the status of migrants and refugees. So this is a way really to build schema, as a literacy teacher would say, and it's also a way to sort of seed a good conversation that's going to be rooted in solid information. So these are a few, again, screen grabs from our website showing some specific teaching ideas relating to migration that you can find. And I want to highlight a couple things here. The teaching idea about Brave Girl Rising, which is a beautiful 20-minute film from the organization Girl Rising that we partnered with, that one and also The Many Faces of Global Migration both use poetry. They use beautiful images, photographs, and artwork to really help students apprehend migration as a human experience. When students work with these resources, they're able to see beyond the headlines and understand some of the individual human stories. And I think that's a really important ingredient in teaching successfully about migration today. The pieces you see on the other side of your screen, different perspectives on migrant detention and what is our obligation to asylum seekers, are pieces that really look more deeply at some of the complex ethical dilemmas and questions that come up around current, in this case, U.S. immigration policy. So different perspectives on migrant detention, for example, features voices from a migrant, a border guard, an immigration judge, and an advocate, all exploring the challenge of detention on the US border that we saw unfolding over the last several months. So we think when students have a chance to learn in this way, we want them to show up not just with their head and approach this topic with intellectual rigor. We also want them to show up with their heart, to have emotional engagement through this learning, and we also want them to activate their conscience, their sense of ethical reflection. So all of these teaching resources are designed really to provoke that kind of rich conversation, with the goal, as you see in the middle of this triangle, of nurturing a sense of informed civic responsibility and civic engagement in all of our learners. So I thank you for taking a look at these. You'll be able to access them after the webinar. And if you'd like, you can join a mailing list.